Hello again. Today we're going to be looking at an exciting topic. But before we go into this particular topic, I just want you to note this. And it is in form of a question. How tillage affects the ecological system? How do you think tillage affects the ecological system? Tillage, if you look at it, it's all about agricultural activities. In fact, it's one of the agricultural activities. It has to do with cultivating a particular area of land in terms of digging and breaking up the soil so as to prepare it for planting, okay, for planting of seeds. And of course, a lot of persons know that this has a positive effect on the soil, but it also has a negative effect. Well, the positive effect is that it helps to loosen the soil, and by loosening the soil, it helps to make the soil aerated and also more porous for water to pass through. But apart from that, while tilling the soil, soil organisms may be exposed and they might be destroyed in the process. Actually, intensive tillage of the soil brings about reduction in soil fertility. And also it helps to break, in fact, it breaks the structure and the texture. Mostly it breaks the structure of the soil. You know, the soil has its own particular structure, but when tillage takes place, it breaks the structure of the soil. And of course, breaking the structure of the soil also can affect soil fertility and plant yield or growth. So today we're going to be looking at the effects of agricultural activities on ecological system, the effects of agricultural activities. And we're going to be pointing out some of these agricultural activities, and we're going to be actually looking at some of their beneficial effects and also their disadvantages or the harmful effects they have on the ecological system and also on man. But before we go into this, I want us to actually look at some of the subtopics we are going to be covering in this particular topic. First of all, we are going to be looking at bush burning. We're talking about bush burning, and we're also going to be looking at the effects of bush burning, what it means, bush burning simply means. And number two, we're also going to be talking about overgrazing. We're going to be looking at overgrazing, the meaning of overgrazing, and we're also going to be talking about the effects of overgrazing. Number three, we're also going to be talking about fertilizer application. Of course, a lot of us believe that the application of fertilizers most times help our plants to grow, but there are some negative effects in the application of fertilizers. We're also going to be looking at application of pesticides as well as herbicides. These are important agricultural chemicals or agrochemicals. And then we're also going to be looking at their effects. We're also going to be talking about tillage and the effects of tillage. We're going to talk about deforestation as well as clean clearing. Okay, clearing the vegetation clean. And we're also going to be looking at the effect these has on the ecosystem at large. And but also we're going to be looking at some specific objective, which is by the end of this particular topic, you should be able to define bush burning and mention some of the effects of bush burning. Do the same for grazing, define grazing, and also mention some of their effects. You should be able to define what fertilizer application is and also mention some of their effects. You should be able to define application of pesticides and also mention some of their effects. You should be able to define tillage and also mention some of their effects. You should be able to define deforestation and their effects, and then clean clearing as well as their effects. So let's take a look at what we have, some of these agricultural activities, and also note some of their effects. The first one on the list is bush burning. Bush burning. As the name implies, it simply means setting a bush or a vegetative place on fire. Setting of fire on the bushes to clear out vegetation. Now, the main purpose why most farmers, okay, apply this poor farming practice is simply because they want to clear their farms, clear out vegetations, and prepare it for planting. Now, bush burning is mostly applied or adopted as a farming practice in some developing countries, which also includes Africa, and where you have a vast piece of land. And one of the ways they can cheaply clear this piece of land is to set it on fire. Now, does this method of agricultural activity or method of farming, does it have some implications? Does it have some effects on the ecosystem? Let's take a look at one of them. One of the effects is that definitely it brings about air pollution. Now, once you start burning these bushes, smoke and soot are always released into the atmosphere. Smoke and soot are released into the atmosphere, and when inhaled by humans and animals, it can bring about respiratory diseases. It also brings about acid rain. It also brings about greenhouse effects and so many other causes that air pollution, or mostly the emissions of these gases from the bushes that are being set on fire, causes on our own health as human beings. So it brings about air pollution and most of the effects of air pollution. Number two is that bush burning exposes the soil to erosion. Now, when you burn the bushes or you burn a particular farmland, you will discover that the bushes are being cleared. They are cleared completely. And that exposes the soil, leaves the soil bare and exposed. And a soil that is bare and exposed can be simply eroded by water and wind. By water and wind. So it leads actually, bush burning actually leads to soil erosion and also leaching of the soil, where the soil nutrients are being removed or wiped away from the top of the soil layer. Next is that bush burning can lead to the extinction of some species of living organisms. Now, most times in some places, hunters actually apply the principle or adopt the practice or activity of setting a particular forest on fire. This helps to draw out most wildlife for them to hunt. Now, that is also another bad or poor agricultural activity or human activity, in the sense that in so doing, if this fire is not actually controlled, it can lead to the death of most organisms and in fact to the extent of extinction. So most forest reserves, most forests or trees or plants, as well as animals, can be killed by these by the fire outbreak. And several times it has been recorded statistically that bushes have been set on fire and it has gone so wild, in the sense that it has affected some houses, most residential areas, and this has caused a lot of environmental disaster. So bush burning should be discouraged. It can lead to what? Extinction. And then also, it reduces the water holding capacity of the soil. So it means that once this happens, the soil becomes more porous. So the soil can hold enough water based on this. Why? Because most of the water would be dried up by what? The fire, by the heat. The heat dries up most of the water that has been retained in the soil. And that brings a whole lot of issue to that particular soil. And then finally, it can also help. One major advantage of bush burning is that the ash that is gotten from bush burning can be applied on the soil. And it helps to fix potassium and phosphorus to the soil. It helps to release potassium and phosphorus to the soil. And of course, potassium and phosphorus are major nutrients that are required by plants in their large quantities. So one of the ways we can also fix in potassium and phosphorus into the soil is by applying ash to the soil. Next is overgrazing. Now, what is actually overgrazing? Overgrazing is a situation where more animals than can be supported on a particular pasture are put there to graze that particular pasture. That is, you are having more animals in a particular area of vegetation grazing that area, and the animals that are there are much more than that particular area can support or carry. So by the time those animals finish on that particular area, they have actually eaten up almost all the vegetations, leaving the soil bare. And of course, you know, when the soil is actually bare, it leads to what? Erosion. And that is one of the major effects of overgrazing. It brings about soil erosion. Why? Because of the overgrazing activity of these animals or ruminant animals. Number two effect is that it destroys soil structure. It destroys soil structure. As these animals are actually grazing in this particular farmland, it brings about the destruction of the soil structure. Now look at the soil structure. The soil structure, the top side of the soil is supposed to be made of humus. And then we have, after the humus, we have the topsoil, which is actually made up of minerals plus organic matter. And then after the topsoil, we have the subsoil. The subsoil is actually made up of silt, sand, clay particles. And after the subsoil, we have the substratum. The substratum involves the parent rock. After the substratum, we have the bedrock, where you have the unweathered parent materials like the gravels and so many other things you found, big heavy stones you find there that has not been weeded or has not been broken into smaller particles. So this is the normal structure of the soil. But overgrazing with time destroys or affects the soil structure. And then number three, it helps to eradicate weeds on farmland. That is one of the important, one of the advantages of overgrazing. Now, when you have weeds on that particular land, it helps by these animals feeding on those vegetative plants that are found there. They as well feed or eat up the weeds. So that is one good advantage of overgrazing. Another advantage of overgrazing is that the dung, that is the excreta or feces or ejection from these animals on farmland can help to improve soil fertility. In fact, most farmers use the dung of animals to make what we call the compost manure, which when applied on these farmland help to improve soil fertility. We also have fertilization application. Now, fertilization application is simply the application of certain chemicals into the soil to improve soil fertility. Now, these chemicals are mainly made up of minerals such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and we call them the NPK. NPK is actually one of the major elements or minerals that are found in fertilizers. And of course, I told you before, plants need them in their large quantities. Plants need them in their large quantities for growth and effective development of the plants. So that is what we call fertilization application. So it's just the application of some chemicals made richly of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to help improve the soil fertility of the soil. Okay. Now, what are some of their effects? The effects of these fertilization or fertilizer application. One of the effects is that it enhances the productive capacity of the soil. Of course, if it improves, based on the definition we gave, we said it helps to improve the soil fertility. And when soil fertility is actually improved, it brings about enhancement or improvement of the productive capacity of that particular soil. Number two effect is that excessive, which is a negative effect, excessive application of these fertilizers on the soil can cause what we call soil acidity. And one of the best ways we can measure the acidity of a soil or alkalinity of a soil is by using the pH meter. Now, the pH meter actually measures the degree of acidity or alkalinity, or pH scale measures the degree of acidity or alkalinity of a soil. Now, if the soil is so acidic, it affects the productivity of plants in that particular soil. If it is too alkaline, it can also affect the productivity of the soil. So application actually of fertilizer increases soil fertility, increases soil acidity. Number three, it increases the porosity of the soil. The application of fertilizer increases the porosity of the soil. Porosity talks about the particles of the soil having enough pore spaces, having enough pore spaces for water and air to pass through easily. Okay, they are not compacted. Now, a normal soil is supposed to have a good, reasonable amount of porosity and not compacted. And that is why if you look at soil that are actually very compacted or so compacted, you find out that they support scanty vegetation. They actually support scanty vegetation because they are actually compacted and they don't have enough porosity. And then also another effect of overgrazing is that it stimulates it stimulates actually, as another advantage of application of fertilizer rather, it stimulates vegetative reproduction. So you see that plants start growing well when fertilizers are being applied. Another on the list, agricultural activities that actually affects the ecosystem is application of pesticides and herbicides. Now, what are pesticides? Pesticides are actually chemicals that are used to destroy pests, while herbicides are actually chemicals that are used to destroy herbaceous plants. Okay, herbaceous plant, that is herbs, weeds in plants, all right? Now, these applications have beneficial effects and they also have harmful effects. Now, let's take a look at some of the effects. Number one, harmful effect of the application, mostly excessive application of pesticides and herbicides, which are also can be referred to as agrochemicals, is it brings about the destruction of useful plants and animals. Excessive application of these agrochemicals can bring about the destruction of useful plants and animals. Number two is that it can destroy aquatic organisms. Now, how is it going to destroy aquatic organism when it is applied on the land? Now, when there is an excessive application of these chemicals on plants on land, and by rainfall, these chemicals are washed into the streams, they become a potent threat to aquatic organisms. So aquatic organisms die in their numbers when most of these chemicals, mostly agrochemicals like the pesticides, the herbicides, are being washed off by the rain into water bodies, okay? So it now brings about destruction of aquatic organisms. Also, pesticides, like we said, they help to destroy pests. So you can destroy or reduce the population of target insects and pests by the application of these pesticides. Pesticides, we said, are chemicals that destroy pests. And pests are actually organisms, usually insects, that destroy crops and reduce or affect the yield of crops. So once we apply chemicals, which is one of the ways to control pests, we call that chemical control. So once we apply pesticides, we help to control the activities of pests and also target insects on our farmland or in the farmland. Next on the line is tillage. Tillage. Remember when we started this topic, we made mention of the word tillage. Now, what is actually tillage? Now, tillage is digging or breaking up of the soil in preparation for the planting of crops. So tillage is an activity that precedes planting, an activity that precedes planting. So it is actually done to loosen or break up the soil so that, in fact, there will be enough porosity for the roots of plants to penetrate deep in order to get water, air, and also nutrients, mineral nutrients, for its growth and survival. So let's take a look at some of the effects of tillage. Some of the effects of tillage. Number one, it helps to loosen the soil. It helps to loosen the soil. And I've told you, by loosening the soil, it increases the porosity of the soil. So it allows air and water to enter the soil easily. And of course, soil organisms are found in this soil. So once the soil is loosed, actually, air can get into soil organisms and they can use that for respiration. So this is also a good aspect of it. It helps to loosen the soil. Like I also said, when plants are planted, or crops are planted rather, on that particular loosed soil, it helps the roots of those crops to penetrate deep as to absorb water and mineral salt. Another effect of tillage is that it changes the structure and texture of the soil, which is very true. Now, the texture of a soil has to talk about the degree of fineness or smoothness of that soil. So it has a whole lot of role to play in changing the structure. We have also looked at the structure of the soil. We said it starts with the humus, and then you have the topsoil, you have the subsoil, you have the substratum, the parent rock, and then all that. These are the structure. But once you start tilling the soil by using a digger, using so many other instruments or farming tools, and even using a tractor, because we can use a tractor to actually till the soil. Now, while tilling the soil, the structure is changed. It simply means that they don't assume the same position they were before. The topsoil might come upwards. The what they call it, the humus might go down, which is not supposed to be. It really affects the structure of the soil, which invariably can also affect the fertility of that particular soil. Number three is that tillage exposes soil organisms and may lead to their death, because by the time the tractor is moving on it, digging out some of these soil, changing the structure of the soil, some of these soil organisms like the termites, the earthworm, they are exposed and they might be killed in the process. So it brings about the exposure of organisms, soil organisms, and even may lead to their death. And then also number four, intensive tillage can lead to the loss of soil fertility. I have mentioned it. It affects the structure of the soil and also may lead to the loss of soil fertility. And then also we have what we call deforestation. Deforestation is also another agricultural activity that affects our ecosystem. Now, what is actually deforestation? Deforestation is the continuous removal. Please note the word continuous. It is the continuous removal of trees either by bush burning or indiscriminate felling of trees without replacing them. Now, why I said take note of continuous removal, the removal of trees have their own positive effects. We can use it as timber, and I've told you before, timber can be used in manufacturing of a lot of things. They can use it for building of houses. You can use it for making manufacturing furnitures. You can use it also for the manufacturing of paper, and so on, which are beneficial to man. They are beneficial to man. But when it is done continuously, when it is done indiscriminately, okay, it now becomes an activity that is regarded as an environmental hazard. Okay, so, and the issue again, look at the definition again. The last part said without replacing them. Without replacing them. So please take note when defining deforestation. It is not just the felling down of trees, but the indiscriminate felling down of trees without replacing them. Indiscriminate felling down of trees without replacing them. That is what deforestation is all about. Now, there are several effects of deforestation. Okay, now let's take a look at first one. It encourages soil erosion and leaching. Remember, we said that trees can be referred to as what we call windbreakers. And one of the types of erosion we have, one of the types of soil erosion we have is the wind erosion. Wind erosion. That is erosion that is caused by wind. And if there are trees and grasses on that particular piece of land, it means that these trees and grasses, they serve as what we call windbreakers. So they help to reduce the speed of the wind so that they don't quickly remove the top layer of the soil and also remove the nutrients of the soil as well. So leaving these trees or planting of this, or sorry, removal of these trees rather, which is deforestation, encourages soil erosion as well as leaching. We also have, it may lead to desertification. Deforestation leads to desertification. The more you keep cutting down trees, the more you keep burning bushes, the more you keep doing a clean clearing of forest or trees, the more that particular area encroaches into a desert-like state. Encroaches into a desert-like state. So deforestation leads actually to desertification. And desertification, some of the characteristics of a desert is that you have low rainfall, you have high temperature, and you have little or no vegetation. Little or no vegetation. Another effect of deforestation is that it hinders microbial activities in the soil. It hinders microbial activities in the soil. Next on the list, which is the last agricultural activity we're going to be looking at, is clean clearing. Clean clearing. Now, what is clean clearing? Clean clearing is actually a practice of clearing and removing the whole vegetation, thus leaving the land clean. That is, you are removing all vegetation. Clearing, it is a practice of clearing the whole vegetation, a practice of removing the whole vegetation and leaving the land very clear. Now, most persons apply this principle for a whole lot of reasons. Some persons probably may want to use that particular place in building houses, constructing roads, and so many other bridges and so many other things, but they have their effects if it relates to farming activities, if it relates to using that particular place for carrying out farming activities. One of them is that it results in the removal of rich topsoil, because as you're doing that clean clearing, you are actually removing the topsoil. As you are removing it, you're removing the topsoil, which will also affect the soil fertility, which will also affect soil fertility. Next is that it leads to the reduction of soil organisms. Of course, most of the topsoil are homes or can be referred to as habitations or habitats for most soil organisms. So the clearing of this habitat of soil organisms can also lead to their removal and reduction in the number of soil organisms. And then number three aspect or effects of clean clearing is that it gets rid of weed on land. It gets rid of weeds on land. Of course, you know, weeds are actually plants that are found where they are not planted, and they compete for space, they compete for nutrient, they compete for water, mineral salt with other useful plants, okay? And they must be removed. And one of the ways we also remove this weed is when we do clean clearing. So clean clearing has an advantage of clearing or getting rid of weeds on the land. Another one is that it exposes the soil to sunshine. It exposes the soil to sunshine. You know, during clean clearing, we said that the soil, the vegetations are completely cleared off. And when they are completely cleared off, the soil is left bare. And then the soil is also exposed to high temperature from the sun, which results in water evaporation. So it means that water will be lost from the soil. And of course, when water begins to leave a particular soil, it affects the soil in general. It affects the soil in general. So if I start planting seeds on that particular soil that has been, have lost a lot of water due to water evaporation, due to exposing this water or clean clearing, definitely I wouldn't expect that particular plant to do well in its yield. So one of the disadvantages, again, of clean clearing is that it exposes the soil to sunshine, which can result in a high rate of water evaporation. So this brings us to the end of this particular topic on effects of agricultural activities on the ecosystem. We're going to meet in our next class, in our next video. Bye for now.